And welcome to animation, technically, again. So based on a couple of questions I've had from the initial videos, one thing that someone was keen for me to talk about was the best practices for skinning a character. So with this, it's very subjective. So I'm sure everyone will have their own methods to doing it, have their own tool sets and such. I don't like to rely on tools where possible. Sometimes I have a base humanoid skin that I use as something to get me a little way into it if I'm using something common. In this case, I've taken a character, a Power Ranger, for a bit of fun, because I particularly like this guy, but also I'm using the UE4 mannequin rig as well. But I'm not using any templates. This is just to give me a base to start with. I'm also making use of Maya's HumanIK as well as a way to retarget some animation. So as you'll see here, I have a second rig in the scene that I've retargeted this one to. So for that reason, I've got that as well. But first what you're going to have to do is, well, add your joints, and when I'm doing that I like to select from the pelvis, so I don't include the IK and the root and everything because I won't be using them for the skinning definition anyway. Obviously binding skin, keeping it to game-esque for max influences because it's pretty standard. Unreal doesn't require it if you're using Unreal, but it's pretty general and has been for some time. Unless you're doing something that you need to be super careful about how much memory you're using, you might knock it down to 3 or even 2, but 4's generally the rule of thumb. Anything above that, you're looking at a lot of extra memory usage. Don't care too much about the bind method, skinning method, or normalizing because we're about to flood it straight away, so bind the skin. Obviously as well, this is a mesh that also needs to be cleaned up, so I'm going to do that quickly. So you can see I've just done a quick and dirty pass on this to clean it up a bit, but with that done, we have a very simple skin pass. And there you go, how to skin a character. No, of course I'm actually going to do this properly. Bad humour on my part, but that's me. So you don't need that humour anymore, but as you can see, my personal way to start with a rig is to flood it from the pelvis. It's my personal preference, as I've said, but I like to start from the pelvis and work my way up the spine, down the arms, then the legs. It lets me do everything in increments, specifically 0.05, which means that 20 clicks is equivalent to 100% binding, 10 clicks is 50%, and you're going to hear a lot of clicking through this, but I generally find that works best, at least for me. Now, most people probably use paint select, because I didn't quite learn that way. I have a habit of using the hotbox to constantly select where I want to go, and obviously you want to make sure you can't select your joints, so you can just start from the pelvis, flood what you need, get your selection, and go from here. And that's how we're going to start. Obviously we're going to start from the spine, so we actually want to make a slightly bigger selection of what I've got. Start from there on the belt. Do remember as well that Maya does allow multiple selection types at once. So when you're doing skinning as well, if you want to transfer something to a single element of mesh, you can select a mesh and then Verts select in order to only select those areas. Same with face selection. It's always helpful to know, and it's something I'll cover in another time as well when you want to look at transferring skinning to updates or different characters to save you some time. But we're just going to start to scroll through your animation. You want your range of motion animation to cover as much as possible, so I've specifically kept a low poly character for this reason. It's nice and easy and quick to skin up. Moving to the next one, what you probably want to do is enlarge, and group selections I use a lot, and that would be Alt and the right and left brackets, specifically the triangle brackets. So that allows you to very quickly select loops up and down, providing your mesh has been modeled correctly, assuming it's been through an FBX importer or exporter or come from a RIPS game. You'll probably find that the attachments and welds are not correct, so you might find that loop selection doesn't always work in the way you need it to, which is unfortunate, and that's the case here, but it just means you get to see a few ways around it. So while we're going to keep this mostly in blocks and everything won't be precise to start with, what you will see from this is that you can go back later and we're going to clean it up using the hammer tool which technically I said no tools, but this is a bread and butter part of Maya, so I see no problem using that. You kind of have to if you want everything to be smooth, but you don't want to paint the weights physically. There will be some painting weights involved, probably around the shoulders and the underarms. That's generally what happens. So when it comes to skinning on the pelvis, because I've done this for the Unreal 4 mannequin, they do like to put a third joint in the centre of the torso, or rather the chest area. It's a very rigid part of most bodies, and you shouldn't expect much movement there. I like to make sure it's still got the same level of skinning between each bone around it, but you should find that your animator won't want to move that part of the body that much, because it is a fairly rigid area of the body. If they do and they just want it for stretch purposes, or it's a toon-esque character, that's fine. And that's what your job is as a rigger, to try and make sure you are accommodating all the possible ways something could want to be animated or moved. Now, I'm only working up the chest still, so everything is still being flooded on the arms as normal. And you'll see why later, because eventually the influence here isn't going to matter. It's going to be overtaken by what's on the clavicles and what's on the upper arms. So it won't matter too much other than holding a bit there. And so you can see that's our body done. If you just go back, you can see some very simple movement, but it gets me the range of motion I want from it. So we'll move up from here and we'll unselect everything, and we'll make a new selection which will cover the neck area. So because this has been done in elements that have been merged together, it's really easy to just select the parts I want here. And then I'm going to start from here, and I'm just going to work my way down a little bit, because I don't want the neck to be too influenced from this. I just want some slight movement, bearing in mind that this character is wearing a chest or a vest on his chest that's solid. It's armor-like, so you shouldn't expect too much movement there. Obviously, you know, it's made of rubber in real life, but the appearance is supposed to be something much more rigid, and so we're going to skin it up with that in mind. So I'm going to start by flooding 500 here, and then I'm probably just going to move out. Now, that's not to say I know exactly how this is going to look once I put animation on it, and chances are you may need to put some other test animation on it to see how it looks. What we're going to do now is just use face selection for these areas here. Need a bit more face selection now, and using Control+1 we're going to go to isolate mode, which is also this button here. It lets you get around, you know, obviously seeing what you're doing, gives you better angles on things. It lets you see what you need to see so you can do more precise skinning. Now, there we go, so you can see how that's going to look, and I can see obviously that's not going to look how I want it, but for the moment that is fine. That's what we need. So we'll bring the head back, and we'll get the head skinned up, and we'll put that obviously on the head bone. There's a couple of areas as well that haven't been caught by this because of the incremental parts of how it's been modelled, or at least how it's been ripped from the game. So obviously I could just do this and flood it, but you do get into a bit of a habit, and I don't like to constantly be switching and putting more numbers in, but you can do it that way. So now we're just going to scroll through, and we're going to leave that how it is for the moment, except that part obviously you can see into the neck, which is not good. So what we're going to do here is loop selections. You can see the loop selection here hasn't quite worked, but a loop selection is selecting one vert and then double clicking on another vert when you have shift held down, and that will form a loop in most cases. And it's probably because of my bad 3D topology here that it's failed on that loop. But you can see there, that's fine. We'll clean that up later. It's just about getting a rough block estimate. There are tools and things that will do this, as well as if you're willing to adjust the fallout, everything on the bind options, you can get something close to this, but it's never quite one-to-one flooded, or flooded in the percentages that I like to work with, so that's why I often don't do this. So you can see there's some clavicle raised there. So for this, we're going to flood the arm, grab everything, and going from that, everything 100% to the clavicle. I just want to make sure that these areas aren't affected, and I only have the core 2 rings around here. which I obviously didn't. Yeah, that was me accidentally doing Control A and not Control Z, which is, again, very easy to do when you're not actively looking at the keyboard. You can easily switch over, so if you press any hotkeys accidentally, in most cases Maya's going to be able to undo everything. In the case of any catastrophic mistakes, make sure you have your auto backup set to maybe every 5 or 10 minutes, depending on your own personal preference, I suppose, and hard drive size, depending on how many copies you want to have. So you can see that's there. And what we're going to do is just take the shoulder here and make sure you have what we want at the back without that. And we're going to do a very light 50%. See, I've missed a couple there as well. Anything else I've missed? You can see those two there we'll have to sort out as well, which I will use to show off one of my other tools. So you can see here in your skin box you have 3 core tools that you often find yourself using when you've got your copy, paste and hammer, which is essentially taking the surrounding verts and making average between them. What I have done, because I don't like using this, I've actually binded them to my own controllers. This is actually a recreation of the UI from 3D Max with a few extra of Maya tools handed poked in. But what you can do is just copy, select, paste, and that allows me to clean stuff up like this. And if I need to clean my skinning up as well, I can call the hammer tool, and that gets me something closer to that, which is fine for the moment. It might even give a slightly better percentage of that. I think I prefer what I had before for the moment. But with that in mind, now we're going to move on to the clavicle, the upper arm rather. So you can see there, we're going to go all the way up, and what we want is roughly the underarm. That's going to be our 50% cut off. And we're going to flood it again up to 50% on the upper arm twist. In the case of the UE4 mannequin, the upper arm twist comes first. It's not the case in every system, but most of them do tend to be. It's slightly different with biped, and if you're using HumanIK as well, it does some funny things with twists if you're trying to retarget. That's why my animation that I bring in that I'm retargeting onto this won't actually have any twist animation. Sort that out. You can see here we've got to keep this in line with this, which we will do in a moment. And I will use that, and I'll fix that by using my tool again, but for the moment we're just going to unselect the area under here. You can see a few more bits where it's come away, and we'll want to fix that soon too. And now we can go a little bit higher, and then we'll unselect just a few more to get roughly where we want to be. So you don't have to be amazingly precise with this. Even if it's a much higher poly mesh, you don't have to be amazing, but it always helps. So obviously these connections around here, you could 1-for-1 match, but because this part is supposed to be rigid, we're going to try and keep it in consistency. Obviously it needs to also touch at these points, so we'll paste it there as well, and that would line up if that matched. Again, the nature of the model. But it's always good to practice on models that aren't perfect, because you can learn a few more things from doing that as well. So it's an arm that, while not perfect, if I just flood this, I can smooth out some bits and pieces as well. Where I have the topology to make it nicer, I will. Because you want things to be as smooth as possible. Ideally, after my cleanup, what I could have done on this as well is just done a weld pass where I flood all the verts. So what we will do, we will fix that at the end of this, and I'll show you a quick way how to do that and clean up your verts. Ideally, I should have done it first, but I was just thinking of the skinning today. And now we're going to nicely smooth out the influence of the joints from the twist bone to the regular bone before we look at doing the elbow. So if you can see, we've got this. If we grow our selection up to there, that's fine. It does look like I was always skinning to the wrong bone. So what we can do here as well is just transfer it over. So if we lock every joint here, except for obviously this one, and then we take our higher, if we can select it, our twist bone, we can just flood everything across to that, unlock that, and your twist bone, and just flood it, take it all, and obviously it can only take what's unlocked, so now you have it transferred. Got our selections back, get back to skinning. Okay, and we'll start with not that much, because I've got to set this back to this. So there's a slight selection issue there which I might have to come back and sort out, but for the moment, I won't worry too much. Looks like we might have some influence from other bones we don't want it to have. Yes, we do. That is not what we want. So we just take that off of them, and anything else it has. You can select, with any selection, if you press this here, you can see what it has selected to it, and you can see it now has influences from lots of other things, because using Control Z in your skinning process causes issues, which we don't want. But for the moment it doesn't matter, because we'll be about to flood this little arm out once we've got to the point here. So with that done, we're just going to shrink the selection, make sure we're growing our selection the correct way, and we'll do it again. You can see this has all gone a bit haywire because the group selection wasn't working, so we'll just take all of this and we'll just flood it back to where it needs to be. Like that. And we'll use this again to just copy, bring that all in here. Do we have everything we want? Close enough. Paste it. And there we go. Let's get a nice elbow bend animation, which will be along here somewhere. There we go. So now as well, I'm just going to flood this to get everything looking a little bit nicer. Again, you can see how I've not cleaned up the topology right, and I quickly fixed it so we could do this. And now we're going on to the forearm, which nice and easy there, because this part here is all solid, so you just want to make it solid. Twists are reversing this, so lower arm first and then the lower arm twist, because the twist will handle your wrist rotation. So if we just flood that for a moment, and then all we have to do is come back in here and sort this out. So we'll start with the surrounding edges. Loop section's got a bit more in than we want, so we want to make sure that's all unselected. Same with there. You see it now, we're just going to clean up so we get a nice bend on that elbow. So it doesn't have to be perfect, and you want to allow for a certain amount of intersection on elbows anyway, because it just looks nicer than having something completely collapsed. We're not using any auto bones to hold the volume. If you have a really higher poly character and you're going to see them up close, you might want an extra bone in between every one that's rotation constrained halfway between the rotation of its parent and its child, or at least what would be the child bone. It wouldn't be directly connected in the chain, but an extra little branch of skeleton. But what that will mean is that if you 100% it to that extra bone there, you'll get 100% of the volume, whereas 50% between two different bones, you're going to fold it in on itself, and the result just won't be as pretty as what you'd like. So you can see here, you can see how I have some twist rotation on this here, so you can see how it looks, and that means we can just flood stuff up to look a little better. But you've got to be careful when the verts aren't connected. This is what's going to happen, and that's why we're going to go back to that at the end and fix it. But now we're going to move on to the hands. And obviously the wrist. Again, bearing in mind that the collar is supposed to be rigid, we don't want any influence to go much further than that. I've left some bones in there from another test rig I was using, which isn't good. I should have cleared that out first, but that's fine here. So we're going to have it at that, and then we're just going to take those centre ones off. so we can finish the rest, and that should be sufficient for the hand. But you can see I've brought it away from here, so that's something else you want to be mindful of. Again, the loop selection not quite working how we want it to, but it's working enough that we can get away with this. But we want to flood it evenly, so it's not perfect, but a little bit of twist is okay, and that won't really be noticed. And obviously as well we have our twist bone here, which is really what we want the influence to be between, but I'm just going to leave it for the sake of this because this is just a skinning test. So I want to move on to the fingers, which doing the thumb first is the easiest. It's also got the strangest area of influence because it comes all the way up here. So I treat fingers in the same way I often treat tails, and that's that I do them halfway between each bone, and then I just grow out the selection a bit. And when I have enough loops, I let the next bone along have a little bit of influence from it, but not too much. Just enough that if it's curling, it can make a nice curl, and as I said, that can look nice on tails. But it means as well you're trying to keep that look where possible, so you can get something nice. So you can see the area that's affected by this, and what still needs to have a bit of influence added for the thumb as well as the other bits. So we'll do that first so we can have some nice clean finger areas to work with. And now we're going to try and fill in those fingers. The upside of rigging stuff like this as well does thankfully lend itself to everything on most characters should be mirrorable, so things like fingers you only have to do once per character. It does reinforce why having a template character to work from sometimes can be very important though, because it can speed up a lot of the job. You can spend a lot of time making an absolutely perfect skinning template that's to your liking, and then when you get a new character along you can just fit it to that and you've got about 90% of the work done for you, which is great for speeding up things on the job. Unfortunately, it means you just have to grin and bear when you do things like this, and you do it a lot. But with any luck, if you're skinning for a job, you might get lucky and find that you have lots of diverse characters and you're not doing hundreds and hundreds of humanoids all the time, because it does sometimes get boring. But that's why you want to be trying to make tools where possible to sort things out like this. You just clean it up when you make a mistake, or if something's been missed, hammer it in. Now keep everything as simple as possible. And with any luck, you'll be working on characters that have hundreds of polys, which is ironically one of my next projects as well. I'm going to give one of the characters from the recent Resident Evil 2 remake a skin and rig treatment as well for a test. So I'll get to work on a character that's exceedingly high poly at the next, I suppose, next gen, current gen level. Modern gaming, we'll call it. And I will be recording that as I go, but probably not doing as in-depth of a commentary for obvious reasons. You can see a few things have gone wrong here, and I'll clean them up after. It's just my loop selection not being careful. Actually, one thing I will do, and something you can do as well if you need to, is just flood select all the joints and change their radius to something a little easier so that you've got better visibility on the hands as well. And if you, I mean, in this case I possibly could have gotten away with just using one finger for both these fingers, or one finger bone, but I'm doing it properly for the sake of this because I care enough, and the animation I'm planning to retarget onto this does actually have regular fingers, so we'll do it right where possible and just kill up the selection, get the right bone selected. You can see as well I make pretty good use of the hotbox, and I wasn't trained in Maya when I first started rigging, So I really did not like the hotbox, and I just referred to it as the mess most of the time because it felt like a mess of options to do what you need. But once muscle memory takes over, you realise how much time it does actually save you from menu navigation. It's just a case of learning what you need, really. So what I'm doing each time here is I'm using the hotbox to toggle between this, but I'm using Q to close the skinning menu each time as well. Got more issues here of things not being welded, which is a problem because we want things to connect together, and so we will do them that way. You can look forward for this as well for any standard rigging test for a game studio or something of the like. It's probably going to give you a file to skin for a skinning test that is full of problems like this. It'll be up to you on whether you want to clean them up for the test or work around them to show off skill. It doesn't really matter which way you do it. Always be careful with your loop selection, because if you don't have back-facing tunnel as well, if you select something here, you will have verts behind it. Always make sure the navigation gizmo is roughly where you expect it to be. Otherwise, unselect that area to make sure you do get everything out you want. There's just one more finger to go, and we're approaching the end of this finally. I say finally, of course we still have the legs to go as well, but that's not as important. It's also not as taxing as the upper arms. It makes for a nice home stretch, I often find. I hope at the very least this lets you see that I'm not the be all and end all of any opinion you should take on this. But there you go, it's not perfect, but it is a successfully, if that hand looks okay to me for what it is, which it does, because again it is low poly, it's not the end of the world. We'll just hammer that. Nope, it doesn't make a difference, so I'm happy with that for the moment. And obviously the fun part comes, that lets you show off how much you've done by doing the copy paste rather than mirroring. Make sure your axes are correct. X positive, X to minus, so we want to go mirror, and now you'll see we have, obviously it's not a perfectly symmetrical mesh, we do have some cleaning up to do, so we'll do that. And then that's got caught in the influence as well, and we have some cleaning up here with our UV lines. So again, possibly because of my cleaning up, I've left a few issues here, but it gives you a bit of a test to clean up if you want to. I'm not worried too much because the arms won't go that high that often. I'm just going to flood here to bring this down. And that, of course, once again, I think it's time we fix this perfectly now before we continue. And in order to do that, we're going to have to leave this because we're using retargeting through HumanIK. It's not actually at its bind pose currently. So what we're going to do is unlock the definition, so it goes back to its bind pose. We're going to duplicate it. We're going to mesh tools. We're going to merge. And now if we delete the history and skin it to this, and copy the skin across. For copying skin weights, this is my preference. This works most of the time for what I need. 1-to-1 in this case does everything because it's exactly the same mesh with the exact same vert count, numbering, etc. This will work perfectly fine. Otherwise, if you're using different mesh, backing up with these two is always a good idea. And now, when we do reapplying this to get our retargeted network of animation, we'll have this, but we can delete the old mesh, just rename that one, so we have consistency, and again moving it there for consistency. But now we won't have the same problem as we had before. So when we do this and we flood it, when my tools come back, there they are, you don't get the same problem, and we can clean this up. Again, it's something you want to check for at the start of things, but it's good for teaching to sometimes work with issues before fixing them. I just don't condone that. If you notice a mistake from your model, get your modeler to fix it. That's the best solution. Now we're just going to fix the neck. So we'll start with here. And then we have the lower neck onto the spine. That's enough influence, I think. And behind, I'm just going to flood this across here as well. And that's enough. That's a bit tight, so what you can do is try that and see if that looks any better. I think it does, so we're going to do that. I could just mirror it again, but for the sake of two little bits here, I'm happy with doing this. Again, it's not how the actual thing would work, but it's a close stretch. I think that should maybe be closer. This would be much better, so we'll do this here, and then this should probably not have any movement or influence on it at all. We'll see how that looks when it's hammered, but I still don't think I like where that's going, so what I'm going to do is bring it in, and in my tool menu I'm just going to select this so I can find out what one's influenced and remove them. So you can see that's influencing. We're going to put this on minus and just remove the influences we don't want. And that gets me my line there. And I can see about doing this. So with loop selection as well, if you want to loop, remember, vertex, shift, double click. If you want a specific section, you can start and end double click and it will fill in the between. And for now I'm pretty happy with that. I think that'll be fine. So now I'm actually going to switch sides because that holster's there, and we'll deal with that later. If I was putting this into Unreal, I might consider putting that an additional bone there for dynamics, but I'm not in this case. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have that hard skin to the leg as well, just to stop it clipping through. But I'm actually going to skin up the right hand side, and then I'll leave that till last. And you see loop selection now works much better. So I'm going to start here on the leg. I should have it, there it is, one that goes out. I'll just go down and I'll bring it in here. Legs can be a bit of a crux point when you're trying to find a nice smooth balance to fit in. You don't want to destroy too much of the pelvis weighting, you want it to be balanced where possible. But also bear in mind that there won't actually be a lot of leg movement in anything unless you're doing some crazy martial arts, which this guy actually might. You want to be conservative. Try and plan for extreme movements, just assume they won't always be happening. The average walk, run, cycle, etc. won't happen, and the vast majority of NPCs, or even in shooters and things, the animations aren't that extreme that the characters will do. But as long as you have a good range of motion to test stuff, you can see how everything looks, what you need. And so for the first time I'm actually going to start painting some weights as well. So now you can hold B and you can drag to increase the size of your influence, but I'm going to change it to this profile so it's got a lot of fall off. You can see, I actually think that might be a bit much. So you can always reverse as well until you get something you think looks nice. Again, if you want things to happen quicker, you can just increase the amount of weight you're painting with. You don't have to use the timeline as well. There are hotkeys to move if you want to scroll through animation, but I'm quite happy doing it this way. I think it works for me, so I keep this up. Again, we're not using anything here to hold the weight, although we do want to make sure that we're getting nice consistent lines from the pelvis to the upper leg. So that does mean we have to come in and fix a few bits. So it's just going to hammer in here to get it looking a little nicer, and then they can clean up what's there. Don't be afraid to constantly redo your own work to get results you like, because it can just neaten everything up, so you can then just go in and clean it up again if you haven't got it. And the amount of times I have reflooded my work because I haven't been happy with the result, it happens quite a lot. So again, don't be afraid, but also bear in mind that the leg may not come back this high that often. And just look at different angles so you can see if the lines are not giving you the smooth result you want. Again, I need to lower the influence so I can get something nice here. Just go around, make sure those curves are smooth. That's all you really need to do. Same with the front, just doesn't need to be much movement, just enough to get what you need. Obviously bring it in a bit as you get towards the crotch of the character. If you're happy with that, just do the rest of the leg as you want to. We'll look at cleaning it. We'll look at cleaning it up once we've got the rest done and we've mirrored it. Because you have to take into account both sides when you're doing the pelvis, like you will do on the underarms. These two areas tend to be the crux point of a character because you have more than two main influences fighting for domination. You've got your upper chest here, your clavicle, and your left arm, or left twist in that case if you're prioritising that. Whereas here you have your pelvis, your upper leg as well, but you've also got the right leg to take in, and you're going to get stretch either way unless you're adding extra units to hold that influence, which you might be doing or you might not. That's completely up to you. So while there is a twist here, I'm going to ignore that for the sake of this, and I'm going to start at the knee. So I'm going to come down to that. Now I'm being a bit overzealous with this, but just to show you off one way of doing it. You see? And now we're just going to go back, and I'm going to take some of that influence out until we get a nice little bit of intersection that covers that volume. And that gives you a mostly smooth result. And we'll see this part of it we're going to be keeping rigid as per the armour of the character. Of course this goes into this, but it probably would be separate if it was a higher poly model. But we're just going to select all of that and we'll do it 50% here. And we'll select those for the two that I missed and just hammer them into it as well. And we'll see how that looks. Somewhere along test animation will be some foot animation. I'm surprised I didn't do more than that, but this is enough to just show off roughly what we want. Oh, also remember when I'm selecting like this as well, hold Control and Shift to add, or just hold Control to deselect from your selection. So Shift and Control, you add, and then Control, you deselect. I don't think I've said that already, so it's worth reiterating because it saves time with menus, which makes everything easier. And now that might be a bit much, but for a low poly character like this, I think we're going to get away with it just fine. And for the front here, we'll just do the same thing with this. Again, keeping it fairly rigid. You don't have to, but it makes it easier when it's lower poly. But it's just a case of putting it back across to the other leg. And obviously, just have the part you want. And now we are going to reverse that, so we can skin across to this. Now you can see where the cleanup needs to happen. It's normally along the centre line in most cases. But don't be afraid to let a bit more in from other parts, just to get a nice result. The hammer tool, especially on low poly models, can really save your day for the amount of time you'd have to invest otherwise in making a custom paint weight character. And you might find yourself in a game where you've got lots and lots of these characters to do, so you're going to spend a lot of time. And now it's just a case of doing this little holster, which I didn't realise is welded to everything. So we'll start here, and we'll just go to the selection out, that, and we'll go to here. Or is that part? See, it's not quite part of it. It's part of the belt, so we'll take it to there. Go into this. It's not perfect, but we'll just add a little bit of pelvis in to try and smooth it nicely between them. As long as it's not intersecting too much, I think we get away with it. And there we go. One skin character. This is obviously not perfectly skinned, but enough that you can certainly work with it, and would probably pass for the game it was made for being included in. And yeah, thanks for watching. If you have any comments or things on this, obviously if I took a character that was much higher poly and cleaned properly, I would be here for days getting a nice skinning pass, which I don't want to do for this. I just wanted to give you a general overview of how I work, and it gives you a sense of different ways you can do things, make animations you can use to test stuff, different ways to select or go about your skinning process, quicker ways to speed up the menu navigation either way. And yeah, I hope this was helpful. See you next time.